My name is Carol, I'm 65 years old, and my son and his wife tried to have me declared legally incompetent just to get their hands on my money. Before I tell you how I took back my life and found a happiness I never thought possible, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It all started on a Tuesday afternoon that felt like any other. I was in the kitchen humming along to the radio and wiping down the counters when the front door didn't just open, it flew inward, slamming against the wall with a crack that made the pictures of my late husband shake. My heart leaped into my throat. Before I could even call out, my son Leo stormed into the house. His footsteps pounded on the hardwood floor, each one like a hammer blow. His face was a blotchy, furious red, the vein in his forehead pulsing. He looked like a stranger in my home, a home I had worked my entire life to keep peaceful. "Mom, what did you do?" he roared. The voice that once called me mommy, the voice I once soothed to sleep, was now a weapon aimed right at me. I stood there, dishcloth in hand, my own voice caught in my chest. He didn't wait for an answer. Tiffany just called me, hysterical, crying her eyes out. "You changed the password on your card," and she was humiliated at Target. Humiliated. Standing there with a full cart of groceries and our baby's diapers, and the card was declined. Everyone was staring at her, Mom. Everyone. He threw his hands up in the air, pacing my kitchen like a caged animal. She had to leave everything there. Do you have any idea how that feels? A cold knot of fear tightened in my stomach. Seeing my only son like this, so full of rage, it was terrifying. But underneath the fear, something else was simmering. A slow burning anger. I took a steadying breath and placed the dishcloth neatly on the counter. "I changed it, Leo, because it's my card," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. "It's my money. I'm not obligated to keep a line of credit open for anyone. Not even for you." He stopped pacing and stared at me as if I'd just spoken in a foreign language. "Obligated? We're family. You don't just cut off family. Tiffany was buying necessities, food for our house. You made her look like a thief." The words stung, not because they were true, but because of the sheer contempt behind them. For 40 years I had sacrificed. I worked double shifts as a nurse after his father passed away to make sure Leo could go to college without a mountain of debt. I gave him the down payment for the very house he and Tiffany now lived in. Everything I had, every ounce of my energy went into building a life for him. And now he stood in my kitchen, his fists clenched, treating me like I was the enemy. Like I was some greedy old woman hoarding what was rightfully his. "Family," I repeated softly, "doesn't treat their mother like a walking ATM, Leo." That just made him angrier. "Oh, here we go. You always throw that in my face. Everything you've ever done for me comes with strings attached, doesn't it?" He had no idea. He stood there, defending his wife's humiliation over a declined card at Target, completely blind to the real reason I had finally put a stop to it all. He thought this was about a password. He thought this was about a misunderstanding. He didn't know that just last week, I'd gotten a fraud alert from my bank. A charge for over $2,000 at a high-end spa resort in Lake Geneva. I nearly had a heart attack. I told the bank it was fraud, of course, but something made me hesitate. I logged into my online account, my fingers trembling, and there it was. Not just the spa, but a string of charges over the last month. Hundreds of dollars at fancy restaurants in downtown Chicago I'd never been to. A $500 charge at a designer boutique. It felt like a punch to the gut. I knew Leo wasn't making these charges. It had to be Tiffany, the sweet, smiling girl who always called me Mama Carol, and praised my cooking, was systematically draining my savings account behind my back. The spa trip was just the final brazen insult. She hadn't even bothered to be subtle anymore. And now here was my son, screaming at me for protecting myself from his wife's secret life of luxury, a life she was funding with my retirement money. He was accusing me of being selfish, of embarrassing the woman who was robbing me blind. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. "How could you be so selfish?" he finally spat, his voice dripping with disgust. "After everything we've been through, you choose now to turn your back on us?" Something inside me just snapped. The fear, the hurt, it all melted away, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I had been silent for too long, making excuses for them, telling myself it wasn't that bad. I was done. He was still talking, his words just a meaningless buzz in my ears. I let him finish. I let the silence hang in the air for a second, heavy and suffocating. Then I took a slow, deep breath, looked him dead in the eye, and opened my mouth to tell him exactly what his darling wife had been spending my money on. Before that moment, before the shouting and the accusations, I would have told you Tiffany was the daughter I never had. I remember the day Leo brought her home for the first time about 3 years ago, with a clarity that still aches. He was beaming, a kind of nervous, hopeful excitement in his eyes I hadn't seen since he was a teenager waiting for a prom date. And then she walked in and I understood why. Tiffany was perfect. It's the only word for it. She was polished but not in a cold way. She was warm, effervescent. She had a smile that seemed to start in her eyes and could light up a room, and a way of looking at you that made you feel like you were the most fascinating person she'd ever met. She didn't just stand there awkwardly. She came right over, took my hands in hers and said, "It is so wonderful to finally meet you, Carol. Leo talks about you all the time." She complimented the house, the pictures of Leo as a baby on the mantelpiece, saying she could see the same mischievous glint in his eyes. When I served my simple roast chicken, a recipe I'd made 1,000 times, she took a bite, closed her eyes for a moment as if in ecstasy, and insisted she'd never tasted anything better. She made me feel like a gourmet chef. She called me Mama Carol from that very first day. It wasn't forced, it felt natural, and it melted a part of my heart that had been frozen since my husband, Robert, passed. The house had felt so cavernously empty. Tiffany filled it with laughter and life. For the first year, things were storybook wonderful. They'd come over for Sunday dinner every single week, and she'd always bring a homemade pie or a bottle of wine. She'd insist on helping me with the dishes, and we'd stand side by side at the sink, talking and laughing like old friends. She'd call me during the week just to chat, to ask about my garden, to tell me a funny story about work. I let my guard down completely. I loved her. I truly did. I tried to keep busy. It was the only way to keep from drowning in the quiet. I threw myself into my garden, pulling weeds with a vengeance, yanking them from the earth as if they were the lies and betrayals that had taken root in my life. I organized closets that were already organized. I tried to reconnect with my old book club, but I found it hard to concentrate on fictional dramas when my own real-life tragedy was so raw and overwhelming. I would smile and nod, but inside, a persistent ache in my heart made everything feel gray and distant. Arthur was the one who pulled me out of it. He called about 10 days after the hearing, ostensibly to inform me that the first court-ordered restitution payment had been electronically deposited into my account. It was a cold, clinical transaction, but it was a start. After we had dealt with the business, he didn't immediately hang up. There was a pause. "How are you holding up, Carol?" he asked, his voice full of a genuine warmth that had nothing to do with billable hours. "I'm fine," I lied, the automatic response of a woman from my generation. "No, you're not," he said gently but without pity. "But you will be. Healing isn't a race." He started calling every few days after that, always with a small practical reason, an update from the court, a question about a document, but the call would always end with him asking about my day. Then the calls turned into invitations. They were casual, no-pressure offers. "I've got an extra ticket to the symphony on Friday, and my usual guest canceled. I'd hate for it to go to waste. Any interest?" Or, "There's a new photography exhibit at the Art Institute I've been meaning to see. I find it's always better to have a second opinion. Would you care to join me?" Slowly, cautiously, I started saying yes. Our outings were easy, comfortable. We talked about everything and nothing. He told me about his late wife, Eleanor, about the crushing silence in his own home after she was gone from a long illness. He spoke of the challenge of navigating a world as a single person after 50 years of being a pair. I told him about Robert, about our dreams for Leo, about the joy and the struggles of raising a son alone after his father passed so suddenly. We discovered a shared love for old black and white movies and a mutual dislike for overly sweet desserts. He had a dry, understated wit that took me by surprise and made me laugh. A real, genuine belly laugh that I hadn't realized I'd been missing so desperately. He never treated me like a fragile old woman or a tragic victim. He treated me like an equal, like a contemporary, like a friend. He listened to my opinions about politics and books and gardening, and he actually valued them. With him, I wasn't just Leo's mom or a retiree, or a victim of elder abuse. I was just Carol, a woman with thoughts and a history and a sense of humor. One sunny but crisp autumn afternoon, we were sitting on a bench by the lakefront, wrapped in our coats, watching the waves on Lake Michigan. "You know," he said, looking out at the endless expanse of blue water. "When Eleanor passed, I honestly thought that part of my life was over. The companionship, the simple joy of sharing your day with someone. I thought my only role left was to be a grandfather and a semi-retired old lawyer. I was resigned to being alone." He turned to me, his kind blue eyes crinkling at the corners. "You've reminded me that life can still hold surprises, Carol. That the book isn't finished just because a chapter ends." His words, spoken so simply and honestly, filled a void in my heart I didn't even know was there. The hole left by Leo's betrayal was still there, of course. It was a scar that would never fully fade. But Arthur's friendship was building something new and strong and beautiful around it. It wasn't a replacement. It was a renovation of the soul. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was something quieter, deeper, and far more meaningful. It was two people who had seen the worst of life finding comfort and unexpected joy in each other's company. The laughter started to feel natural in my house again. The silence was no longer heavy and oppressive. It was peaceful and companionable. For the first time in years, I felt like I was being seen not for what I could provide but simply for who I was. And it was a feeling I had almost forgotten was possible. 6 months after that day at the lake, on a perfect sun-drenched afternoon in early June, Arthur and I were married. We didn't have a big fancy wedding. We had both been down that aisle before. This was something different. It was just us, Brenda and Arthur's brother, who flew in from Boston, standing in my backyard. The roses, the ones I had poured so much of my heart and grief into, were in full glorious bloom, as if nature itself were celebrating with us. We wrote our own vows. They weren't about forever promises or youthful passion. They were about companionship, respect, and the quiet joy of finding an anchor in the storm of life. As I stood there holding his hands, hands that had fought for me, hands that had held mine in comfort, I felt a sense of profound and utter peace settle over me. A peace I thought I would never feel again. My life today is nothing like I imagined it would be when I was a young woman, or even a few years ago. I thought I would spend my golden years surrounded by my son, my daughter-in-law, and eventually, the laughter of grandchildren filling this old house. That dream is gone. It died in that courtroom, and the grief for it is a quiet, permanent companion that I have learned to live with. Leo has never tried to contact me. The court-ordered check arrives in my bank account on the 1st of every month, a cold and personal reminder of the chasm between us. I hear through the grapevine that they sold their house and are struggling financially. There is no joy in that knowledge, only a deep, weary sadness for the boy I once knew. But what I have now, this new life, is real. It's tangible and it's built on a foundation of truth and mutual respect. I have a partner who cherishes me, a friend who makes me laugh until I cry, and a home filled not with obligation and entitlement, but with warmth, lively debates over the newspaper, and genuine affection. We travel a little, taking road trips to see national parks we'd always talked about. We read a lot, often in the same room in comfortable silence. And we spend most evenings sitting on the back porch, drinking tea or a glass of wine, just talking. It's a simple life, but it's a good life. It's a life that is truly mine. I lost nearly $50,000. But the real cost of their greed was my son. And that's a debt that can never be repaid. In losing him, though, I was forced to find myself again. I was forced to learn the hardest, most painful lesson of all. Sometimes the people you are bound to by blood are the ones who will hurt you the most. And sometimes the family you choose in the second act of your life, the family that enters when you least expect it, is the one that truly saves you. Your dignity, your peace of mind, your sense of self, these things are not for sale at any price. They are your most valuable assets, and you have every right to protect them with everything you've got, even if it means walking away from someone you have loved your entire life. You are not a resource to be depleted. You are not an obligation to be managed. You are a person to be cherished. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. It wasn't easy to share, but I felt it was important. I hope it can offer some strength or validation to someone else out there who might be feeling trapped, invisible, or disrespected by the very people who are supposed to love them most. I have a question for all of you watching. Have you ever had to make an impossible choice between your family and your own well-being? Please, share your story or your thoughts in the comments below. Reading them helps all of us remember that we are not alone in these struggles. If my story resonated with you, please consider giving it a like and subscribe for more stories from people just like us. You deserve to be heard. Then the small requests began. They were so subtle at first, woven so skillfully into conversation that I barely noticed. It started about 6 months after their wedding. We were clearing the table after dinner when she sighed, a little theatrical puff of air. "Is everything all right, honey?" I asked. She gave a little embarrassed laugh. "Oh, it's silly. It's just Leo's paycheck is a little late this month with the new direct deposit system at his work, and we're in a bit of a bind with the rent due. Don't worry, we'll figure it out." She looked at Leo with such love. "We always do." Of course, my heart went out to them. "Don't be silly," I insisted. "How much do you need?" "Just until Friday." "Oh no, Mama Carol, we couldn't," she protested, but her eyes were hopeful. "Well, if you're sure. Maybe $300? Friday came and went. There was no mention of the money. I didn't bring it up. I told myself they were probably too embarrassed. A month later it was $500. Their car needed a new transmission, she explained, her face a mask of worry. She showed me a quote on her phone from the mechanic. It all looked so legitimate. The month after that, a few hundred more for an unexpected medical bill for their cat. Each time there was a perfectly plausible story. A crisis that made me feel needed, delivered with that same sweet, apologetic smile. The repayment was never mentioned again, and I convinced myself it was because they were struggling and too proud to say so. The real shift, the moment the ground began to crumble beneath my feet, happened about a year ago. Tiffany called me in a full-blown panic. Her voice was tight with pain. She said she had a terrible throbbing toothache and had just come from the dentist. She needed an emergency root canal. Her dental insurance, she explained breathlessly, wouldn't cover the full amount, and the endodontist wanted payment upfront before they would even schedule her. "It's $2,000, Mama Carol. I'm in so much pain I can barely think straight, and I don't know what to do," she cried into the phone. My motherly instincts kicked into overdrive. All I could picture was my poor daughter-in-law suffering. "Don't you worry about a thing, honey. That's a medical emergency. You give that clinic my credit card number right now. We'll sort out the details later. You just get out of pain." She thanked me so profusely, her voice thick with relief, telling me I was her angel, her savior. I hung up the phone with a warm glow of satisfaction, the feeling of a mother being able to slay a dragon for her child. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about her, hoping the procedure went well. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up trying to sleep and went to my computer. I just wanted to check my online banking and see if the charge from the dental clinic had gone through. It had. $2,000, just as she'd said. I felt a wave of relief. But then, as my eyes scanned down the list of recent transactions, my heart stopped. There was another charge, posted just 30 minutes after the one to the dentist. It was for $450. The merchant name was a boutique on Michigan Avenue, a place so high-end their purses cost more than my monthly mortgage payment used to be. My blood ran cold. I clicked on the transaction details. It was an online purchase. I just stared at the screen, my mind scrambling, trying to make it make sense. A dental emergency followed by a designer handbag shopping spree? I slammed the laptop shut, my hands shaking. There had to be an explanation. Maybe Leo, feeling sorry for her, had bought her a gift to cheer her up. Maybe my card had been compromised by the clinic. I went through a dozen different scenarios, each one more unlikely than the last. The one possibility I refused to entertain, the one my heart wouldn't allow, was the simplest one. That Tiffany had lied. That she had manufactured a crisis, cried crocodile tears over a phantom toothache, just to get my credit card number. I told myself it was just a one-time bizarre mistake. If only I had known it was just the first tremor before the earthquake that would swallow my whole world. The incident with the handbag left a permanent, sour taste in my mouth, but I buried it deep. I was a child of a generation that valued peace above all else. You didn't air dirty laundry. You didn't cause waves. I told myself that confronting them would only cause an irreparable rift, and maybe, just maybe, I had misunderstood. So I did the opposite. I tried even harder to prove to them and maybe to myself that we were a happy, loving family. For Christmas that year, I decided to give Tiffany something truly meaningful. something that whispered of legacy and unconditional acceptance. I gave her my mother's pearl necklace. It wasn't a showy piece, just a single perfect strand of cream-colored pearls with a delicate, hand-carved silver clasp. But it was priceless to me. It was the necklace my father, a man of simple means, had saved for an entire year to buy for my mother on their first anniversary. She wore it to my wedding, to Leo's baptism, to every significant moment in our lives. Before she passed, she put the worn velvet box in my hands. Her own hands were frail and paper-thin. "One day, Carol," she'd whispered, "give this to a daughter who will understand what it means. It's not about the pearls, it's about the love." I never had a daughter, so I decided Tiffany would be that person. I wanted to formally welcome her into the heart of our family's history, to show her that she was cherished. When she opened the box on Christmas morning, her reaction was everything I had hoped for. Her eyes filled with what looked like genuine, overwhelmed tears. "Oh, Mama Carol," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion as she lifted the pearls from their satin bed. I don't know what to say. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." She carefully clasped it around her neck and turned to me. "I'll treasure it always. I promise." She hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. In that moment, watching the pearls glow against her skin, all my doubts and suspicions washed away. I felt a wave of shame for ever having suspected her of anything so crass as stealing. 2 months later, my phone rang. It was Tiffany, and she was hysterical. It wasn't a performance. It was a full-blown 5-alarm panic. "Our house? Oh my God, Carol, we were broken into," she managed to get out between gut-wrenching sobs. "They took everything, Mama Carol. The TV, Leo's laptop, and the necklace." My heart stopped beating. "The pearl necklace?" I asked, my voice a hollow echo of her panic. "Yes," she wailed. "It was in my jewelry box right on the dresser. The police said they must have just swept everything into a bag. I feel so terrible. It's all my fault. I should have put it in a safe." I spent the next hour on the phone with her, my own grief a lead weight in my stomach, trying to console her. I told her it wasn't her fault, that possessions were just things, that what mattered was that they were safe. But inside I was shattered. The one tangible piece of my mother I had left was gone, probably sold for a few dollars to a pawn shop by some stranger. Tiffany kept crying about how empty and violated she felt. She even, through her tears, managed to hint that if I could just give her some money, maybe she could find a replica, something to fill the void of the sentimental loss. I politely but firmly steered the conversation away, my own sense of loss too raw and real to entertain such a ghastly suggestion. I mourned that necklace for weeks. Every time I looked at a photo of my mother, my eyes would go to her neck, and the loss would hit me all over again. But then the world tilted on its axis. My neighbor Brenda, a retired librarian with a mind like a steel trap and a surprising talent for navigating the depths of social media, came over for her weekly coffee. We were just chatting about our gardens when she said, "You know, it's funny. Tiffany's sister Jessica just posted a whole album of photos from a bachelorette party she was at in Nashville last weekend. Looks like they had a grand old time." I nodded, stirring my coffee, not really interested. "That's nice for her," I said. Brenda gave me a peculiar, searching look. "You should see the pictures. Jessica's wearing this really lovely pearl necklace. It looks almost antique." She slid her iPad across the kitchen table. "Doesn't it look familiar?" I picked up the tablet, my heart starting a slow, heavy drumbeat. And there it was. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. It was a picture of Jessica, flushed and laughing, a plastic tiara perched crookedly on her head. And around her neck, gleaming under the neon lights of a Nashville bar, was my mother's pearl necklace. There was no doubt. It was undeniable. The unique hand-carved silver clasp, a tiny, intricate leaf design, was facing the camera. It was a detail only I would know. A detail I had traced with my finger 1,000 times. I couldn't breathe. The air was sucked from my lungs. It wasn't a burglary. It was a lie. A monstrous, cruel, calculated lie. Tiffany hadn't just allowed my mother's necklace to be stolen. She had taken it off her own neck and given it to her sister like it was a cheap piece of costume jewelry. And then she had constructed an elaborate, painful charade, making me grieve all over again, all while plotting to use the fake story to try and get more money out of me. I stared at the picture, at Jessica's thoughtless grin and my mother's pearls. This wasn't about money anymore. This was a desecration. She had taken a symbol of my family's enduring love, a legacy passed from mother to daughter, and treated it like trash. She wasn't just targeting my bank account. She was methodically, gleefully erasing my history, my memories, one precious piece at a time. For a full day and a sleepless night, I just sat with that cold, hard knot of rage in my stomach. It was a righteous anger, the kind that burns away fear and confusion, leaving only a chilling clarity. I went to the library and printed out the picture from Brenda's iPad. The image was a little grainy from being enlarged, but the necklace, my mother's necklace, was perfectly, damnably clear. I then went into my study, to the small antique desk in the guest room where Tiffany sometimes sat with her laptop. I opened the bottom drawer and reached all the way to the back. My fingers closed around the folded piece of paper I had found months ago and had tried so hard to forget. It was a crisp, clean photocopy of the front and back of my primary credit card. The 3-digit security code was circled. I had shoved it back then, my mind refusing to accept the premeditated malice it represented. Now, holding it in my hand, it felt like a confession. I called Leo and told him in a voice that was eerily calm that we needed to talk. "It's important," I said. "Come alone." He came over that afternoon, walking in with a slight air of caution, as if he were entering a hostile territory. I had him sit down at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd done his homework as a boy, where we'd celebrated countless birthdays. I wanted him in the heart of our home, surrounded by the ghosts of our happier past. "Leo, we need to have a serious discussion about Tiffany," I started, my voice carefully neutral, betraying none of the seismic fury churning inside me. He immediately tensed up, his shoulders tightening. "What about her? Is everything okay?" I didn't say anything. I just slid the printed photograph of his smiling aunt-in-law across the table. He picked it up and squinted at it. "It's just Jessica at a party in Nashville. Tiffany showed me these." "So what? Look at her neck, Leo. Look very closely." He held the paper up to the light from the kitchen window. I watched his eyes trace the familiar strand of pearls. For one fleeting second, I saw a flicker of recognition, of genuine confusion. But it was extinguished in an instant, replaced by a shuttered wall of defense. He had made his choice. "It's a pearl necklace, Mom. A lot of people have pearl necklaces." "That is my mother's necklace," I said, my voice low and steady, each word a carefully placed stone. "The one I gave to your wife for Christmas. The one she told us, crying her eyes out, was stolen in a burglary." He put the picture down and let out a long, heavy, patronizing sigh. It was the sound of a patient man dealing with a difficult child. "Mom, are you sure? I mean, really sure?" Tiffany was devastated about that. I was there. She was an absolute wreck for weeks. "I am 100% sure," I said. Then I slid the second piece of paper across the table to him, the photocopy of my credit card. "And I found this in the guest room desk a while ago." He glanced at it for less than a second, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face, and pushed it back toward me. "Okay, so she made a copy in case of emergencies. That's being prepared. That's smart. An emergency, Leo? Like a $2,000 spa trip? Like a $500 handbag? Those aren't emergencies, that's theft." My voice finally cracked, the anger leaking through. And that's when his entire demeanor shifted. The defensiveness vanished, replaced by a look of profound, pitying sadness. It was the most insulting expression I had ever seen. It was the look you give a sick, confused relative who is no longer making sense. "Mom," he said, his voice dropping to that gentle, placating tone that set my teeth on edge. "Listen to me. You've been under a lot of stress since Dad passed. It's been years, but that kind of grief lingers. You've been forgetting things lately." I stared at him, utterly dumbfounded. My mind was reeling. "Forgetting things? What on earth are you talking about?" "You know," he said, waving a hand vaguely as if plucking examples from the air. "Little things. You called me twice last Tuesday to ask about the same plumber recommendation. Last month you were convinced we had agreed to have dinner on Saturday, but it was Sunday. Tiffany mentioned that when you gave her the necklace you told her it was a loan, not a gift. She didn't want to upset you by correcting you. And she was worried when you kept asking about it afterwards, As if you'd forgotten giving it to her. She was worried about you, Mom. We both are. It was the most brilliant, insidious, soul-crushing lie I had ever heard. He was taking tiny, normal slips of memory that happened to everyone and weaving them into a tapestry of my supposed incompetence. He was twisting reality, using my age as a weapon against me, painting me as a confused, deteriorating old woman. He was making me the problem. The photocopy? I must have given her permission and forgotten. The necklace on his aunt-in-law? A different necklace, and I was just confused. Every piece of my hard evidence was being systematically reframed as a symptom of my own mental decline. Leo, that is a lie. A vicious, ugly lie. I said, my voice trembling with a rage so deep it made me feel dizzy. He just shook his head slowly, that infuriating look of pity still fixed on his face. It's okay, Mom. We're not mad. It's not your fault. We just think, maybe it's time we helped you manage things a little more. Your finances, your appointments. Just to take some of the pressure off your shoulders. He wasn't just protecting her. He was her willing accomplice. He was actively participating in a campaign to make me doubt my own sanity. He was gaslighting me. And the most terrifying part? Staring into the sincere, worried eyes of my only son, the boy I had raised. For one horrible split second, his gaslighting was so effective it almost worked. Leave, I said. My voice didn't rise. It dropped, becoming eerily calm. It held a core of glacial steel I hadn't known I possessed. I want you to leave my house. Now. Leo actually looked taken aback, genuinely hurt. As if I were the one being cruel and unreasonable. Mom. I'm just trying to help. Out, I repeated, pointing a trembling finger toward the door. He left, shaking his head with that same look of profound disappointment. The door clicked shut, and the house fell into a silence that was louder than his shouting had been. My mind was a maelstrom. They weren't just taking my money. They were engaged in a deliberate psychological campaign to dismantle me. To take my mind, my credibility, my very sense of self. They were trying to erase me while I was still standing right here in my own kitchen. I spent the next 2 days in a fog of fury and gut-wrenching fear. My first act of rebellion was small, but it felt monumental. I went online, navigated the labyrinthine website of my bank, and changed the password and PIN on my credit card. It was a simple act of self-preservation, but it felt like I was fortifying the walls of a castle under siege. It was me finally definitively drawing a line in the sand. I knew it would provoke a reaction. I knew it would escalate things. I just didn't know how quickly. I didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, my doorbell rang. It was a Sunday afternoon. I looked through the peephole and my stomach plummeted. It was both of them, Leo and Tiffany, standing on my porch with carefully arranged, placid smiles. Tiffany was holding a box of pastries from my favorite local bakery, the one I only went to on special occasions. They looked like a picture from a magazine. The perfect, loving son and daughter-in-law, paying a surprise visit to their beloved mother. The whole scene was a carefully crafted performance, and I was its unwilling audience. I opened the door, my heart pounding a nervous, frantic rhythm against my ribs. I didn't invite them in. I just stepped back, and they entered as if they owned the place. They chattered brightly about the beautiful weather, about a new show they were watching on Netflix. Tiffany placed the box of pastries on the kitchen counter with a flourish. "We brought you a little treat, Mama Carol," she chirped, then came toward me and gave me a hug. It felt like being embraced by a beautifully decorated cage of thorns. "We came to apologize," Tiffany began, her voice dripping with a thick, honeyed sincerity that made my skin crawl. She sat on the edge of the sofa, folding her hands neatly in her lap like a well-behaved schoolgirl. "Leo told me you were upset, and I think there's just been a huge, terrible misunderstanding. We never ever want you to feel like we're taking advantage of you. We love you." Leo sat in his father's old armchair, his usual spot, and leaned forward with an air of earnest gravity. "Mom, we've been talking. A lot. And we feel terrible about how things went the other day. We think we have a solution. A way to make everyone comfortable and avoid all this confusion." I remained standing by the mantelpiece, my arms crossed tightly over my chest. I felt like a general surveying the enemy's envoys. I didn't say a word. I just waited. "We don't want to have to bother you every time a small emergency comes up," Tiffany continued, her eyes wide and innocent. It's truly embarrassing for us to have to ask, and we know it's a burden on you to have to worry about it. So, we thought, what if we set up a more formal, streamlined arrangement to make things easier for everyone? An arrangement? I asked, my voice flat and cold. Exactly, Leo said, nodding enthusiastically, as if he just had a brilliant idea. Instead of you having to worry about your credit card being compromised, or us having to ask you for things, you could just set up an automatic transfer into our account each month. A fixed amount. That way we know what our budget is for household extras, and you have your complete privacy and peace of mind. No more arguments. No more hurt feelings. A clean slate. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of it was breathtaking. They weren't apologizing. This wasn't a peace treaty. They were here to negotiate the terms of my financial surrender. And what kind of fixed amount did you two have in mind? I asked, the words tasting like poison. Tiffany and Leo exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance. It was the look of two business partners confirming their numbers before a presentation. It was Tiffany who spoke, her voice still sweet and reasonable. Well, we ran the numbers and we were thinking $1,500 a month. That seems fair and would really help us out. It would cover our extra household expenses and give us a little breathing room. $1,500. That was nearly my entire Social Security check. That was my grocery money, my utility bills, my property taxes, my safety net. They weren't asking for help. They were demanding a salary. A salary for being my children. I just shook my head, slowly, deliberately letting the silence stretch. No. The smiles vanished from their faces so fast it was like watching masks fall off. Tiffany's face hardened, her sweet expression curdling into one of petulant disbelief. Leo's jaw clenched so hard a muscle jumped. No. Leo repeated, his voice sharp with incredulity. Just no? After we came here to try and make things right? Mom, you're being completely unreasonable. I'm being unreasonable? A hysterical laugh, sharp and bitter, bubbled up in my chest. You come into my house after weeks of stealing from me, and demand an allowance like a pair of spoiled, greedy teenagers, and I'm the unreasonable one? That's when Leo's voice turned as cold as a winter tomb. We are trying to build a future here, Mom, and you're standing in the way. If you don't want to help us, that's your choice. But if you're not capable of managing your own money responsibly, then maybe someone else should be doing it for you. I froze, the blood draining from my face. What are you saying? He didn't even flinch. He looked me straight in the eye, his gaze as hard and unforgiving as granite. Guardianship, Mom. If a person is deemed mentally incapable of handling their own affairs, the law allows for a family member to step in and take over. It would be for your own protection, of course, to stop you from making mistakes. The threat, naked and ugly, hung in the air between us, suffocating me. The boy I had nursed through fevers, the one I had sacrificed everything for, was threatening to have me legally declared a non-person, to strip me of my independence, my autonomy, my very identity. Also, they could have guaranteed access to my bank account. I finally found my voice. It was a whisper, but it carried the weight of a lifetime of love that had been curdled into ash. Get out. Mom, just listen to reason. Get out of my house. Now. They left without another word, the door clicking shut behind them. In the dead, crushing silence they left behind, I knew this was no longer a family argument. This was war, and I was not going to fight it alone. Before I could even formulate a plan, before I could call a lawyer, they made their next move. Their strategy was brilliant in its cruelty. They decided to take the battle public, to poison the well of my reputation before I could even draw a single cup of water from it. Our neighborhood, a quiet suburb of Chicago, has a monthly potluck in the local park. It's a tradition that's been going on for 20 years, a comfortable, friendly affair where we all catch up on gossip, kids, and gardens. I always bring my famous 7-layer dip. It's practically legendary. I almost didn't go that month. The thought of facing people, of having to plaster a smile on my face while my world was imploding, was physically exhausting. But my neighbor Brenda, a woman with a spine of pure steel, wouldn't hear of it. You cannot let them make you a prisoner in your own home, Carol, she'd said, her voice firm. You hold your head high and you go. You show them you are not afraid. So I went. I saw them as soon as I arrived. Leo and Tiffany were standing near the dessert table, holding paper plates and laughing with another couple. They looked for all the world like the neighborhood's golden couple. Handsome, successful, happy. My first instinct was to turn around and flee back to the safety of my quiet house. But then Tiffany's eyes met mine across the lawn. She didn't look away. She gave me a small, sad little smile, a look of pure theatrical pity, before turning back to the group she was talking to. And I knew Brenda was right. I had to stay. Their approach was insidious. They never came near me. They worked the crowd like seasoned politicians, separating and then rejoining, weaving a web of whispers. I was sitting on a picnic blanket with a group of ladies from my old book club, trying to pretend I was interested in a conversation about hybrid tea roses, when Leo wandered over. He gave me a wide berth, stopping to chat with the husband of one of the women. He spoke in a low, somber tone, but it was a performance meant for a wider audience. It was meant for me. "Yeah, we're a little worried about my mom," he said, just loudly enough for all of us to hear. He sighed, a heavy, burdened sound. "Her memory's just not what it used to be since Dad passed. She gets confused. We're just trying to do what's best for her. You know? But she's at that age where she's very resistant to help. It's tough." My face burned with a hot, shameful flush. Felt like a physical blow. The women I was sitting with suddenly found their shoes, their plates, the clouds in the sky, incredibly interesting. Anything to avoid looking at me. A few feet away, Tiffany was having a similar, carefully staged conversation with another group. I could hear snippets of it drifting on the breeze. So forgetful lately, misplaces things. Accuses people of taking them. It's just so sad to see her decline like this. We feel helpless. They were laying the groundwork for their guardianship claim. Right here in the middle of our community, in front of the people I had known for decades. They were methodically discrediting me, painting a public picture of a senile, paranoid old woman. I felt trapped, a specimen under a microscope. Every friendly eye in that park now felt like it was watching me, judging me, pitying me. It was the most profound and calculated humiliation I have ever experienced. My own son, my flesh and blood, was telling our friends and neighbors that I was losing my mind. All for money. I wanted to stand up and scream the truth. I wanted to hold up a sign detailing their theft, their lies, the stolen necklace. But what good would it do? Who would they believe? The word of a supposedly confused old woman, or that of her handsome, successful, deeply concerned son and his sweet, worried wife? I was about to gather my things and make my escape, to run home and lock the door, when something amazing happened. They had made a critical, arrogant miscalculation. They had underestimated Brenda. Brenda had been standing near the grill, supposedly in a deep conversation about barbecue sauce, but I knew her better. Brenda hears everything. I saw her put down her plate of potato salad, her face set like granite. She walked straight over to Leo's group, didn't even glance at them, and came directly to me. She put a hand on my shoulder. Her touch was firm, steadying, a silent transfer of strength. Then she turned around and faced Leo. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the park chatter like a surgeon's scalpel. "You know, Leo," she said, her eyes boring into him with an intensity that made him physically recoil. "Your mother has a sharper mind than all of us put together. She remembers the birthday of every child on this block, the title of every book she's ever read, and she can still calculate a medication dosage in her head faster than a pharmacist. Maybe you and your wife should worry less about her memory, and more about your own conscience." The silence that followed was deafening. Leo's face went from concerned sun-red to guilty as sin white in a heartbeat. A few people shuffled their feet awkwardly. Tiffany, from across the lawn, looked like she'd been slapped. In that moment of public humiliation, seeing my son exposed, even for a second, something inside me changed. The hurt and the shame were still there, but they were now encased in a layer of glacial ice. The fear was gone. In its place was a cold, clear, and absolute resolve. They had tried to break me in front of my world. Now I was going to break them in front of a judge. The very next morning, I was on Brenda's doorstep before she'd even finished her first cup of coffee. I didn't even wait for her to open the door fully before the words came tumbling out. "I need the name of that lawyer, Brenda. I need it now." She let me in without a word. Her expression grim but understanding. She poured me a cup of coffee my hands were shaking too much to hold properly, and just sat with me at her kitchen table while I cried. They weren't the weak tears of a victim anymore. They were tears of pure, unadulterated rage. They have to be stopped, I finally said, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. I don't even care about the money anymore. It's what they're trying to do to me. To my name. To my mind. They're trying to steal my life while I'm still living it. Brenda nodded. I know a guy, she said again, her voice firm. My cousin went through a nasty divorce a few years back. Her ex tried to pull the same thing, claimed she was an unfit mother because she was emotionally unstable, all to get the house and custody of the kids. This lawyer, he didn't just win the case. He tore the ex-husband's testimony to shreds so thoroughly the man practically ran out of the courtroom with his tail between his legs. A divorce lawyer? I asked, unsure. This isn't about a marriage ending. He's not just a divorce lawyer, Brenda corrected, writing a name and number on a piece of paper. He's semi-retired now. He told my cousin he's done with the standard messy divorces. Now he only takes on special cases. Cases where people are being bullied and manipulated. He has a soft spot for cases involving financial abuse of the elderly. His name is Arthur Vance. He's old school. No nonsense. And he absolutely hates bullies. She pushed the paper across the table. Felt heavier than it looked. Felt like hope. I called him that same morning from Brenda's kitchen. His assistant, a woman with a kind and professional voice, must have heard the desperation in mine, because she put me through to him immediately. His voice on the phone was calm and deep, the kind of voice that exudes competence. It was reassuring. He listened to my frantic, jumbled story. A torrent of words about credit cards, necklaces, lies, and guardianship threats, without once interrupting me. When I finally ran out of breath, my story hanging in the air between us, there was a long, thoughtful pause on the other end of the line. I held my breath, terrified he would say he couldn't help me. Mrs. Peterson, he said finally. His voice was grave. Can you be at my office downtown at 2 o'clock this afternoon? Walking into his office felt like stepping into another era. It was on one of the higher floors of an old, stately building downtown. The walls were lined with dark wood bookshelves crammed with thick, leather-bound law books. It smelled of old paper, lemon polish, and quiet confidence. Arthur Vance himself was a man in his late 70s, with a full shock of white hair, piercingly kind blue eyes, and a handshake that was surprisingly firm and warm. He didn't waste any time with small talk. He gestured for me to sit in a comfortable leather chair opposite his large mahogany desk. He had a yellow legal pad and a pen in front of him. All right, Carol, he said, his tone gentle but direct. Brenda's cousin speaks very highly of me, so I'm going to do my best to live up to the hype. Start from the very beginning. And don't leave a single solitary thing out. So I did. For over an hour I told him everything. I told him about the small loans that were never repaid. The lie about the root canal that turned into a handbag. I told him the story of my mother's pearl necklace, my voice cracking as I showed him the picture on my phone. I told him about the photocopy of my credit card. I described the scene at the potluck, the calculated public humiliation. And finally, my voice dropping to a whisper, I told him about their threat to file for guardianship. He listened intently, his pen occasionally scratching a note on the pad. He didn't show any shock or surprise. He just listened, his expression thoughtful, his eyes never leaving mine, as if he were putting together the pieces of a complex and ugly puzzle. When I was finished, a heavy silence filled the room. I felt drained, exposed, as if I had just confessed every secret shame and foolish mistake I had ever made. Arthur leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. He looked at me, and for the very first time since this nightmare began, I felt like someone truly saw me, truly believed me without an ounce of doubt or pity. They've been building a case against you, Carol, he said, his voice grim. The constant narrative that you're forgetful, the public performance at the park, they're laying the foundation to make a judge believe you're incompetent. It's a classic, nasty strategy. But bullies, especially greedy ones, always get sloppy. They think they're smarter than everyone else. To fight this, I need ammunition. I need every bank statement, every credit card statement you have from the last 2 years. Everything. I went home and did as he asked. I pulled out the old shoebox from the back of my closet where I shoved all my statements. It felt like a monument to my own willful ignorance. A paper trail of my denial. I packed it all into a larger box and drove it back to his office that evening. As I handed the heavy box over to him, I felt a tremor of fear. I was handing over the proof of my foolishness, my vulnerability. I had no idea that in that messy pile of paper, he would uncover a secret far more sinister, far more calculated, than I could have ever imagined. A week crawled by. Each day felt like a year. I jumped every time the phone rang, my stomach twisting into a knot, only for it to be a telemarketer or a wrong number. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I just paced my house waiting for the other shoe to drop. Finally, on a Thursday afternoon, Arthur's assistant called and asked me to come into the office. Her voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of urgency that made my blood run cold. When I arrived, Arthur wasn't sitting behind his desk. He was standing by the window looking out over the Chicago skyline, his hands clasped behind his back. On the large, gleaming conference table in the center of the room, my financial life for the past 2 years was laid out in a series of neat, horrifying stacks, full of brightly colored sticky notes and highlighted lines. It looked like the aftermath of an explosion, meticulously reassembled by a forensic accountant. "Carol, please sit down," he said, his voice gentle but grave. The way he said it, the way he didn't immediately meet my eye, sent a fresh wave of dread through me. He walked over to the table and picked up a multi-page spreadsheet he had created. It was a timeline of my financial ruin. "I've gone through everything, Carol," he said, his voice quiet. "And I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but it's substantially worse than we thought." He walked me through it, step by agonizing step, his voice calm and methodical, which only made the details more shocking. It wasn't just a few $100s here and there for handbags and dinners. Over the past 18 months, nearly $30,000 had been systematically siphoned out of my retirement savings account. He showed me the pattern. Small online transfers to an account I'd never heard of, disguised with vague descriptions like household expenses. Frequent cashback withdrawals from my debit card at the grocery store, always for the maximum amount. "This wasn't random," Arthur said, pointing to the spreadsheet. "This was a planned weekly withdrawal. They were paying themselves an allowance out of your savings." Then he moved to the credit cards. It turned out there weren't just unauthorized charges on my main card. He had run a full credit check on me. Tiffany, using my social security number, my date of birth, and my mother's maiden name, information she would have easily gleaned from casual conversation, had opened 3 separate credit cards in my name with major department stores. They were all maxed out. Another $15,000 in debt, all linked to my name and my good credit, with the statements being sent electronically to an email address I didn't recognize so I would never see them. I felt the room start to spin, the edges of my vision going dark. $45,000. It was a huge chunk of the nest egg my husband and I had worked our whole lives, sacrificing vacations and new cars to build. I felt a wave of nausea. "But that's not the worst of it," Arthur said, his expression turning grim. He slid another piece of paper across the polished table. It slid to a stop right in front of me. It was an application for a personal loan. $10,000. From one of those predatory, high-interest online lenders. The application was in my name. My social security number was correct. My address was correct. And at the bottom of the page was a signature. It was a clumsy, shaky imitation of my handwriting. A forgery. The loan had been approved 2 months ago, and the money had been deposited into the same unknown bank account as the other transfers. They hadn't just been stealing my savings. They had been actively taking on new crippling debt in my name, systematically destroying the good credit I had spent a lifetime building. I just stared at the forged signature. My own name twisted into a lie to steal from me. How could they do this? I whispered, the words barely audible. "Greed, Carol. It's a cancer of the soul," Arthur said, his voice losing its gentle tone and taking on a hard edge. "They were building a lifestyle they couldn't afford on your back. They probably assumed that by the time you found out, if you ever did, they would have successfully had you declared incompetent, and no one would believe you anyway. Or worse, they were counting on your eventual inheritance, and just decided to take a very large advance." He let me sit with the horror for a moment. I felt like I was drowning in the sheer scale of their betrayal. My own son. He had watched me work my fingers to the bone, And then he had stood by, or worse, participated in this demolition of my life. Then Arthur's voice cut through the fog, sharp and focused. "It's a disgusting, calculated plan to ruin you," he said, his voice now hard as steel. "But in doing so, they got sloppy. People like this, who think they're smarter than everyone else, they always make arrogant mistakes. On the application for that $10,000 loan, they had to list an email address for correspondence." He pointed to a line on the application I hadn't even noticed. "They didn't create a new anonymous email address," he continued, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "Tiffany used her own personal email. The one she uses for her Facebook account, for her online shopping, for everything. It's a direct, undeniable digital link between her and this fraudulent loan. It's the kind of arrogant, lazy mistake that loses cases. It's the mistake that's going to hang them." The day of the guardianship hearing, I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me like a shroud. Arthur had prepared me for what was coming. We had sat in his office the day before, and he had looked me straight in the eye. "They are going to try and assassinate your character, Carol," he'd warned me. "They will take every memory you have, every act of love, every moment of vulnerability, and they will twist it into a weapon to use against you. They will lie with sincerity and cry with calculation. Your only job is to not react. You sit there and you let them lie. Our turn will come." I sat beside Arthur at the respondents' table, my back straight, my hands folded neatly in my lap on top of my purse. Across the aisle sat Leo and Tiffany with their young, slick-looking lawyer who looked like he'd just stepped out of a television commercial. Tiffany was dressed in a conservative navy blue dress, her hair pulled back in a severe, modest bun. She had a tissue clutched in her hand and her eyes were already red-rimmed and puffy, as if she'd been crying all morning in anticipatory grief. Leo sat stiffly beside her, his jaw set, staring straight ahead, refusing to look at me. He looked like a man attending a funeral. In a way, he was the funeral of our family, and he was one of the pallbearers. Their lawyer went first. He was smooth, his voice oozing a practiced, somber sympathy. He painted a masterful, tragic picture of a loving son and daughter-in-law, burdened with the terrible, heartbreaking task of caring for an aging mother who was tragically, progressively, losing her grip on reality. He spoke of my erratic behavior, my increasing confusion, my unfounded and hurtful accusations. He mentioned the incident at Target, framing it as a confused episode that had deeply embarrassed my poor daughter-in-law. He made me sound like a monster, a paranoid old woman lashing out at the very people who were just trying to help her. Then he called his first and only witness, my son. Leo walked to the stand, his shoulders slumped as if under a great weight. He avoided looking at me, focusing instead on the judge with a face etched in sorrow. He placed his hand on the Bible and swore the oath, his voice thick with emotion. "Your Honor," he began, his voice cracking on cue, "I love my mother more than anything in this world. This is the hardest thing I have ever had to do." He then proceeded to tell a story that was a complete, breathtaking work of fiction. He spoke of his father's passing and the immense pressure he felt to provide for his own family, to be the man his father would have wanted him to be. He admitted with a heavy sigh that he had made some unwise investments with some of the money from what he called the family fund, my life savings, and that he had every intention of paying it all back with a handsome profit. He was just waiting for the market to turn around. He claimed he only opened the other credit cards to consolidate debt and make things simpler for me to manage, so I wouldn't have to worry. "She gets so confused by all the bills and the paperwork," he said, shaking his head sadly, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. "I was just trying to help her. I was trying to protect her. But when I tried to explain the investments to her, she got paranoid. She didn't understand. She accused me of stealing. She accused my wife of the most terrible things. She's not the mother I grew up with anymore, Your Honor. She's scared and confused, and we're scared for her." He even had the audacity to bring up my late husband, his father. My father, he was a provider. He would have wanted me to step up and make sure she was taken care of, to protect her from herself and from making poor decisions with the money he worked so hard to leave for her. It was a brilliant, despicable performance. He twisted his greed into a tragic story of a son's misguided love and overwhelming responsibility. He made himself the victim. He used the sacred memory of his own father to justify his crimes. He was desecrating everything that had ever been good and true in our family. I sat there frozen, my blood like ice in my veins. I listened to the son I raised systematically dismantle our entire life, our entire history, and rebuild it into a weapon designed to destroy me. Every word was a physical blow, a knife in my heart. The room was silent, captivated by his performance. The judge was listening intently, his expression unreadable. I could feel the tide of sympathy in the room turning toward my son, the dutiful, heartbroken child who was just trying to do the right thing. When he finished, he finally allowed himself to look at me. There were tears in his eyes, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were the self-serving tears of a performer who had just nailed his monologue. Their lawyer sat down, looking immensely pleased with himself. He had made his case. Now, in the eyes of the court, I was just a sad, confused, paranoid old woman. Arthur stood up slowly. He moved without haste. He didn't have a stack of files or a heavy binder full of notes. He was holding a single slim folder in his hand. Their entire elaborate house of cards, built on a foundation of lies and pity, was about to come crashing down. Arthur walked calmly toward the witness stand, the slim folder held loosely in one hand. He didn't look at Leo with anger or contempt. He looked at him like a patient teacher about to explain a simple but important lesson to a particularly difficult student. "Mr. Peterson," he began, his voice filling the quiet courtroom, calm and measured. "You've painted a very moving picture of a son trying to protect his mother's financial legacy. Let's talk about that protection. Let's start with this document." He opened the folder and placed a single piece of paper on the witness stand's ledge. It was the application for the $10,000 high-interest loan. "Is this your idea of protecting your mother's finances? Taking out a loan with a 25% annual interest rate in her name? A loan she knew nothing about." Leo's face, which had been a mask of sorrow, instantly paled. That was an investment. A short-term business opportunity. I was going to pay it back before she even noticed. "An investment in what, precisely?" Arthur asked, his tone still conversational. A tech startup," Leo stammered, clearly grasping at straws. "It was a sure thing." "I see," Arthur said, picking up a thick stack of highlighted credit card statements from his table. "And I assume the $2,000 charge at the Serenity Springs Spa and Resort in Lake Geneva was also a prudent business investment? Or the $500 at a designer boutique on Michigan Avenue? Or the $700 at Gibson's Steakhouse? Were these all part of this sure-thing tech startup?" He read off a list of a dozen extravagant charges, each one a nail in Leo's coffin of lies. With each one, Leo shrank a little more in the witness chair. He stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence, looking desperately toward his lawyer, who could only offer a helpless shrug. The lawyer had been ambushed. He clearly had no idea about the depth of his client's fraud. Arthur wasn't finished. He turned his attention toward Tiffany, who was now staring at her hands in her lap, as if they held the secrets of the universe. He didn't need to call her to the stand. He simply nodded to his assistant, who dimmed the courtroom lights slightly. He projected a series of crystal-clear images onto the large screen positioned for the judge and the entire court to see. The first was the social media photo of her sister, Jessica, beaming and drunk at the Nashville party, with my mother's pearl necklace, my legacy, around her neck. A collective audible gasp went through the small audience in the courtroom. I saw Tiffany flinch as if she'd been struck. The next image was a screenshot of an online receipt from the high-end handbag boutique, time-stamped for 2:30 p.m. on the very same day Tiffany had supposedly been in agonizing pain at a dental clinic in the suburbs. "Mr. Peterson," Arthur said, turning back to the shell-shocked man on the stand, "your wife seems to possess a remarkable, almost supernatural ability to be in two places at once. In excruciating dental pain that required $2,000 of your mother's money, and simultaneously engaged in retail therapy for a $500 handbag. Can you explain that particular miracle?" Leo just stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He was drowning and he knew it. But Arthur had saved the most damning piece of evidence, the single arrogant mistake, for last. "Your Honor," Arthur said, now addressing the judge directly, "the petitioners have based their entire case, Their entire justification for this cruel action, on the idea that Mrs. Peterson is confused and unable to manage her own affairs. They claim they opened these fraudulent accounts and took out this fraudulent loan to help her. But let's look at the application for that $10,000 loan one more time. He projected the loan application onto the screen larger this time. He had used a digital highlighter to draw a bright red box around the field for the applicant's email address. There, in clear black and white, was Tiffany's personal email address. tiffany.peterson88@gmail.com. This email address, Your Honor, is not a secret, Arthur explained. It is the same email address listed on Tiffany Peterson's public social media profiles. It is the same email address she used to RSVP to her high school reunion. And it is the same email address to which the loan approval and transaction records were sent. He let that sink in. The digital fingerprint was irrefutable. And what did Mrs. Peterson's daughter-in-law purchase with the proceeds from this helpful loan taken out in her supposedly incompetent mother-in-law's name? Arthur continued, his voice ringing with quiet, cold triumph. We subpoenaed the bank records for the account where the funds were deposited. She bought 2 round-trip, first-class tickets to Hawaii for a vacation scheduled for next month, and a down payment on a brand-new luxury SUV. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. Their lawyer had his head in his hands. The judge stared at the screen, then down at his papers, then he slowly, deliberately, took off his reading glasses and looked directly at Leo and Tiffany. For the very first time, I saw their masks of concern and sorrow completely shatter. Underneath was not sadness or regret. It was the ugly, raw, unfiltered fear of 2 common criminals who had just been caught. They knew they were done. Arthur walked back to our table and sat down. He had not raised his voice once. He had simply presented the truth, piece by undeniable piece. He had let their own greed, their own arrogance, their own sloppy, stupid mistake tell the real story. And that story was not one of love and concern. It was a sordid, pathetic tale of theft, deception, and a betrayal so profound it defied imagination. The judge put his glasses back on, the small clicking sound echoing in the cavernous silence of the courtroom. He looked at Leo and Tiffany for a long, heavy moment, his gaze sweeping over them with a look of such profound disappointment and disgust that it made even me flinch. Tiffany had her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with what might have been real sobs this time. Leo was ashen, staring into the middle distance as if he were watching his entire life burn to the ground. In my 20 years on the bench, the judge began, his voice low, but carrying an authority that was absolute, laced with a cold fury that was more terrifying than any shouting could have been. I have seen many heartbreaking family disputes. I have seen arguments over inheritance, custody battles, and bitter disagreements. But rarely, if ever, have I seen such a calculated, cruel, and predatory campaign of deceit waged by a child against their own parent. He looked directly at Leo, and my son, for the first time, seemed to shrink under the weight of his gaze. You came into this courtroom, sir, and you swore an oath on the Bible to tell the truth. You then proceeded to weaponize the memory of your dead father. You cloaked your avarice in a mantle of filial concern, and performed a monologue of sorrow. It is, frankly, one of the most disgraceful and perjurious performances I have ever had the misfortune of witnessing in this chamber. He then shifted his gaze to Tiffany. And you, madam, you orchestrated a campaign of emotional manipulation and outright fraud, culminating in the theft of a family heirloom which you treated like a bauble, all while plotting to have the victim of your crimes legally stripped of her rights. It is a level of callousness that I find truly staggering. He picked up the petition they had filed. He held it up with 2 fingers as if it were something soiled. The petition for guardianship, the judge declared, his voice booming like a gavel strike, is not only dismissed, it is dismissed with prejudice, meaning you can never bring such an action against your mother again in this or any other court. This court finds Mrs. Carol Peterson to be of sound mind, sharp intellect, and fully, unequivocally competent to manage her own affairs. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding since the hearing began. Arthur put a reassuring hand on my arm, and I gave him a weak, grateful smile. But the judge wasn't done. He was just getting started. Furthermore, he continued, his eyes still locked on them, this court is referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation into potential criminal charges, including fraud, forgery, and perjury. Tiffany let out a small strangled gasp. Their lawyer's head shot up in alarm. In the civil matter before me, the judge went on, his voice like rolling thunder, this court orders the immediate closure of all fraudulent credit accounts. A judgment is entered against both Leo and Tiffany Peterson, jointly and severally, for full restitution of all funds taken, which this court calculates to be $45,000, plus interest and all of Mrs. Peterson's legal fees. A strict repayment schedule will be established and monitored by this court. Failure to comply will result in immediate wage garnishment and seizure of assets, including that new luxury SUV you were so eager to purchase. He paused, letting the full weight of his words sink in. Their Hawaiian vacation had just turned into a decade of debt. Finally, he said, his voice dropping slightly but losing none of its intensity, this court is issuing a 5-year restraining order. You are to have no contact whatsoever with your mother, directly or indirectly. No phone calls, no emails, no text messages, no visits. You will not come within 500 feet of her person or her property at all times. This is not for her protection from physical harm. It is for her protection from your profound emotional and financial toxicity. You have forfeited the right to call her your mother. He banged his gavel. The sound cracked through the room. This hearing is adjourned. It was over. Just like that. I had won. Completely, utterly, and devastatingly. My money, my name, my freedom, they were all safe. A wave of relief so powerful it made me dizzy washed over me. As people started to file out of the courtroom, my eyes found Leo. He was still sitting at the table, staring into space, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat. He looked lost, broken. A boy who had gambled away his soul and lost. He never once looked at me. Not when the judge was eviscerating him. Not when the verdict was read. Not even now as I walked past him. It was as if I didn't exist. I had won the war. I had taken back my life. But as I walked out of that courthouse and into the bright, indifferent Chicago sunlight, the victory felt hollow. The weight in my chest was heavier than ever. Because in order to save myself, I had been forced to utterly destroy my only son. I had won the war, but in the process I had lost him forever. The first few weeks after the hearing were the hardest. The restraining order was a legal document, but it was also a physical manifestation of the chasm that now existed between me and my son. The phone never rang with his number. No cheerful, fake text from Tiffany appeared on my screen. The silence in the house was a physical presence. A heavy blanket that smothered all sound. Every room held a ghost. In the living room I saw Leo as a boy, building an elaborate fort with couch cushions and blankets. I saw the faint decades-old scuff marks on the kitchen wall where he'd crashed his tricycle. I saw the worn spot on the armchair where I used to sit and read to him for hours, his small head resting on my chest. I had fought for my independence, for my home, and my reward was a profound and crushing loneliness within its walls.